dietitian, which is the only professional credential in nutrition, but I'm an ethical vegan, and that's how I got into nutrition. And I always joke that I kind of have a foot in both worlds, because in the nutrition field, I'm the radical weird vegan at the conferences, the guy with the beard, I'm easy to point out, But then with all my vegan friends, they make crazy claims about veganism and nutrition. And I've had to remove myself from online groups, vegan groups, because they say, in my opinion, crazy things about veganism and nutrition. And so I'm kind of like can't win, right? Because I'm doing both. And I think you'll see this in kind of how I present and the things that I talk about. So why vegan? Traditionally concerned for animals. I mean, that's what you see with a lot of people. Is the ethical concerns about raising and killing animals for food. And it's important to remember as practitioners that could be so. I work with, not a lot, but some people in eating disorder recovery who find me because the dietitian that they were originally seeing would not allow them to stay vegetarian or vegan. Because they said, no, you can't restrict your food in any way. And they said, well, look, I'm an ethical vegan. I've been vegan for 10 years. I've had an eating disorder for 3 years. It's not related. And they said, no, you have to eat eggs. You have to eat these other things. And so it's important to understand as practitioners or future practitioners that there are ethical reasons for picking food. And it sounds obvious. I think a lot of vegans are looking at me like, yeah. But that's not obvious to everyone. And then second, environmental impact. Livestock's long shadow, if you're not familiar, is a report by the UN that basically says your transportation choices have more of an impact on the environment. I'm sorry, your food choices, very important point, your food choices have more of an impact on the environment than your transportation choices. And that's phenomenal, right? Because people will debate until they're blue in the face over like a Prius versus a non-Prius and all of those things. But you try bringing up veganism to most Prius owners, and they don't want to hear it, right? But this report here by the UN is pretty substantial. It's something to look up if you're interested. And then health. Eating more fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. There are vegans that are just eating that way for health reasons. And then athleticism. I have this as a question mark. I do a lot of talks specific to vegan athletes, and I put a question mark here because it's a very new thing. And, well, relatively new. And one point I like to make is about this race. It's sort of the turning point for me. Scott Jurek, who has a terrific book called Eat and Run that I recommend that just came out this year. He won this race. It's in 2006. I was there. I was very fortunate to be there. It's a 135-mile running race. Okay, 135-mile running race. Those are like 5 marathons, right? In Death Valley in July, right? Because if you're going to run through Death Valley, you should do it the hottest point of year, right? That only makes sense. So he won 2 straight years and set the course record. He credited his vegan diet. He was already an established elite ultra runner. And then this was kind of the pinnacle of his career. And he said, I did this because of my vegan diet. And those are claims that I don't make as a professional, but I'm just telling you that he made these claims. And this, 7 years ago now, I think was kind of the turning point when you look at the number of athletes choosing to eat vegan diets. So vegetarians have been under intense research for decades. Because it was fortunate in the 70s when there were a lot of vegetarians, they said, okay, the way that studies work is you have to find groups of people doing similar things in order to study them. Well, in the 70s, a lot of vegans and vegetarians lived in communes, which was really easy for researchers at universities. A lot of the research was done in Boston, a lot of vegetarians, a lot of universities, so they started studying vegetarians. And then this Adventist health study, Seventh-day Adventist, it's a type of Christianity where they believe you should be vegetarian. And about half of Adventists are indeed vegetarian or vegan. And so that makes a great cohort to study. And they've done this. There is Adventist Health Study 1, which for 40 years, I believe, followed tens of thousands of Adventists who are very similar in a lot of ways. Very unlikely for them to smoke, they get exercise, they eat well, but about half of them don't eat meat, and half of them do. And they looked at them, and a lot of the times when you hear, oh, vegetarians, they're less likely to get cancer, less likely to get heart disease, they live longer, a lot of that comes from these Adventist health studies. And the second one just started. We're getting some preliminary data from that. And they're following 100,000 people. It's huge. 100,000 people. And in the research world, this is big because you get so much data from that. And they actually have enough people who are over 100 years old that it's one of the first cohorts to look at the sort of nutritional effects of people who live longer than 100. So amazing. And then Oxford EPIC study, it's out of England, emphasis on vegetarian, same thing. They're following these groups of people, seeing how they eat and seeing who gets what diseases. And then the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the professional group for dietitians, they have this position paper. Every 5 years they hire some experts to look at all of the research that's been done on vegetarians and vegans, and then they come up with this position. And they say appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. And then it goes on to say that it's good for all the life cycles. This is a pretty strong statement. I was the past chair of the vegetarian practice group that works within the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Let me tell you, they are not a pro-vegetarian organization in any way. And yet, they looked at the research, and this is what they came up with. And so what are some of those health outcomes? Leaner body mass. Vegetarians are more likely to have to be leaner. Lower rates of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and some cancers. It's pretty outstanding, right? Those are all the things, all of the outcomes that you would want to see, these chronic diseases that kill the most people: heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes. Cancer, there's a lot we don't know about cancer. I kind of don't get into that discussion because there's so much to it and it's very complicated. But for those first three, there's pretty strong evidence. So what are some of those mechanisms? More fiber, more phytochemicals, less saturated fat, and vegetarians are eating more plant foods, right? And we know plant foods are healthy. Whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, they're eating more of these things. And I know some people are thinking, I know a vegetarian and he only eats potato chips and drinks soda, right? And we know those people. I know those people for sure. But the research actually says vegetarians eat more fruits and vegetables than non-vegetarians. So we have the data to back that up from those previous cohorts and other studies. So nutrition and plant-based meals, here's sort of like my bullet points for why I think it's beneficial. Fruits and vegetables are nutrient dense. So you're getting a lot of nutrients for not that many calories. And that's an important consideration because if you don't want to gain weight, you want to eat, a certain amount of calories per day. And so those are the amount of calories that you have to get all the nutrients you need. That's the way that nutrition works. And if you're eating things that are very nutrient dense, it's beneficial. You're going to get your more nutrients easier. So nutrients are derived from more diverse foods than the standard American diet, which has the fortunate acronym of SAD, right? And what I mean by this is, when you get into these debates, people say, well, steak has, X, milligrams of iron, per serving. I want the equivalent. I want to know what has exactly the same. And it's like, well, it doesn't quite work that way. You're getting your nutrients from a variety of things through the day. And when I have clients keep track of their, I have them keep track of what they eat for 3 days. And sometimes I'll glance at it and go, ooh, calcium might be a little bit low. But then when I actually run the numbers, it all adds up. Because they're not getting, half a day's of calcium in 1 glass of milk. They're getting it throughout the day from a variety of things. 10% here, 15% here, 5% there. And then we're finding that it does indeed add up. So as a general rule, you find that vegetarians and vegans are eating smaller amounts of nutrients more often. Phytochemicals. This is the future of nutrition, really. I mean, the field isn't really looking at scurvy anymore, right? We don't see a whole lot of vitamin C deficiency. It's like we really don't need to worry about nutrients as much as we think we do in some ways. And so phytochemicals are the future, I think, of nutrition. And they come from plant foods. You know, are you getting your lycopene from tomatoes, your isoflavones from soybeans? That these are the components of food that have real beneficial effects over the long term. And this is where all of the research is going. And I think pop culture is starting to catch up with that sort of thing. And so if these foods are beneficial, you know, if purple cabbage is, you know, a superfood, you know, who's eating it? Well, vegetarians and vegans are eating it. You know. So to touch on just athletes, because that's sort of my niche here, carbohydrates are fuel. Right? We need to eat carbohydrates in order to do the things that we want to be doing. And I did a speaking tour in the spring, and I was in Chicago, and I was at a friend's house, and she had the Paleo for Athletes book, and so I picked it up, and I was flipping through it, and I was very, very interested to see that their recommendation was between 25 to 45% of calories from carbohydrate, and for endurance athletes, closer to 55%. 55% fits within most recommendations for carbohydrates. And so now you're seeing that something like paleo and vegan aren't as different as they're made out to be by both sides. That the actual Paleo for Athletes book recommends about half of your calories from carbohydrate. You know, and I found that to be really interesting. And, you know, there are some differences in which foods they are recommending specifically. But I would bet that their recommendations, you know, looking at actual whole foods would be similar to something that I would recommend. You know, I think one of the benefits, sorry, I'm going on a bit of a paleo rant here, is that they say eliminate refined carbohydrates, you know, refined sugars, refined grains, that those should be eliminated. And I agree with that. And I think when people see results from a paleo diet, that's because they've eliminated those groups of foods. And I recommend the same thing to my clients. What about protein? The question that always comes up, right? But where do you get your protein? It's important for regulation, growth of cells, organs, muscles. Requirements actually for athletes aren't that high. And for the average person, they don't even need to think about protein, in my opinion, that they're getting enough. Deficiency, muscle mass loss, fatigue. This is the sports nutrition dietary practice group, so it's dietitians that focus on athletes. And for vegetarianism, they just say, you know, eat a variety of plant-based sources. That's it. They don't say anything specific. There's not red flags. It's not in bold. They just say eat a variety of foods, and you can get enough protein. An important point is that plant foods contain all of the essential amino acids, right? They're not missing. People say this, oh, it's an incomplete protein. That's not the case. That plant foods, whole plant foods, you know, oil is excluded, it's not a whole food. They contain all of the amino acids that we need to get from our diets. You don't need to combine protein. That's a myth. It was popularized by what's her name, Frances Moore Lappé for Diet for a Small Planet in the 70s, you know, because that book was insanely popular, and she said, you have to combine your proteins if you're going to be vegetarian. Well, by the second edition, which came out, I think, in like 1980, she said, no, that's not true. You don't need to do that. It's not true. The research says you don't have to combine proteins. That was how many years ago now? Right, 33 years ago? And people still say this all the time. Oh, you got to make sure you eat rice and beans together, right? And there's other things that we need to think about, I think, you know, beyond protein. So I think it's distracting to discuss it, you know, ad nauseum. Term incomplete protein, I think, is misleading. Legumes, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and more all supply protein. You know, I have some friends that are raw vegans, and they're athletes. So think about this. They don't eat anything cooked. So what does that eliminate? Like, eliminates grains and breads and beans unless they're sprouted. So they're surviving off, you know, fruits and vegetables, right, basically. And that makes me go, wow, what do you eat, right? The questions that I usually get. And I've done some, you know, I've had them keep diet records. I've done some really minimal research with them. And I'm astounded, you know, they're getting about 12% of their calories from protein without eating like 5 bags of nuts a day. You know, they don't have to do that because they're getting it from these other foods. You know, a banana has about 1 gram of protein in it. It's not totally protein deficient, you know, and I think, like, I want to, you know, if I have any influence on the nutrition field, I want people to not be so obsessed with protein and nutrition for vegetarians. So protein primer on no meat athlete, which is actually, a lot of that is in this book. I've always cringed when speakers say, oh, it's in my book, because I think they just want you to buy it. But this just came out. I literally got it delivered and held it in my hands for the first time a few hours before I got here. So I'm very excited. I'm a co-author for it. I'm not Matt Frazier. I am Matt Ruscigno. It's confusing. Both our names are Matt. But I talk about the protein primer that I wrote for that website pretty often, and it is also included in the book. So, benefit of plants for athletes, it's a great carbohydrate to protein ratio. People are finally getting over the protein obsession for athletes and bodybuilders. And if you look, even outside of bodybuilders, but I'd say most athletes now understand that after you work out, you need to replenish with carbohydrate mostly. You need some protein in there, but you have to replace the glycogen storage that's in your muscles. Your muscles are fueled by carbohydrate. They're made of protein, but they're fueled by carbohydrate. And so plants actually have a great carbohydrate to protein ratio. Fruits and vegetables are hydrating, right? Because they contain water. Antioxidants are a type of phytochemical, right? They aid recovery because of they repair cells and get rid of free radicals. Healthy fats for increased caloric needs. Even within veganism, there are many, many different types of recommendations and schools of thought for what you should and should not be eating. I'm of the thought that plant-based fats are good for you, that they are indeed beneficial, and there's some research there too with walnuts and the same omega-3s that are in fish, are found in walnuts and in flax seeds and even kale. So back to healthy fats. There's a lot of research that says plant-based fats are actually good for you, and fat doesn't make you fat. Eating too much does, So I don't think people should avoid them. I think it's actually beneficial. And easy to eat, right? Eating fruit and bananas and whatnot. Sometimes you see I'll flip through Bicycling magazine and there'll be a letter to the editor about, oh, these gels and power bars are so expensive for all my rides. I'm like, well, just eat fruit, Like a banana's like 20 cents, And it's very similar. I mean, the makeup of a banana is actually quite perfect for doing endurance events, And it's easy to eat. It even comes with its own little case, right? So creating plant-based meals, because sometimes I get blank looks about what it is you actually are eating. And I like to think of it this way. Grains, vegetables, legumes, and nuts or seeds, right? It's how a lot of the world eats. I had a sociology professor in undergrad who said, he thought I was a sociology major. And I was like, no, I'm just taking these classes. I'm a nutrition major. He's like, nutrition? He's like, you just need to eat like most poor people in the world eat. Not the really poor people, just the regular poor people. And I was kind of offended that he was dissing my entire field, right, with one sentence. But in a lot of ways, this is how a lot of people around the world eat. It's a grain, vegetables, hopefully, and some legumes, hopefully, and maybe a little bit of meat or whatnot. But, we can replace that with more legumes or nuts or seeds. And this is how I eat. And, I eat a lot of one-bowl meals. Almost everything I eat is in a bowl. And it kind of follows this formula. Emphasize whole foods. This is very important for vegans, for anyone. There's a lot of nutrition stuff out there that says eat like a vegetarian, even if you don't want to be one. And an important part of that is eating more whole foods. Fake meat and cheese as complements, if desired. I don't think they need to be totally avoided. People think they're clever and they go, if you're vegetarian, why do you need to eat fake hamburgers? And it's like, well, I grew up eating hamburgers, and I like their taste, and occasionally I want to eat one that doesn't involve an animal, right? And to me, that seems really obvious, but I get this question all the time. And I don't think these foods need to be avoided. Are they health promoting? Maybe not necessarily. But are they actually bad for you? I don't think so. All the stuff that says, oh, it's just as bad as the real thing, I don't think that's completely true. But I do think that they should just be a complement to what it is you're eating. Variety. eating a variety of things. I'm doing research for an upcoming project, and I'm finding that this whole phytochemicals, there's literally thousands of them, and it's important to get a variety of them because, we don't know which ones are actually great and which ones aren't, and just eating a variety of different grains and vegetables and fruits and getting all of those phytochemicals from different sources. Fruits and salads can be meals. This is something I learned from my raw friends, right? That you can eat a couple apples at a time. You can have a giant salad for dinner, and even as an athlete, you can do that and get enough calories. I think growing up in the United States, it's like vegetables are only sides, right? And it's like we can eat way more of that than we realize, And also that helps too when you do the math. Iceberg lettuce, for example, it's just water, right? Iceberg lettuce is just water. That's true if you're only eating a quarter cup. But I went and worked with this athlete. He was at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado for modern-day pentathlon, which is a very weird Olympic-specific event that I won't get into, but you swim and you run and you fence, you do all this stuff. And he was raw, and he was very restricted, almost a fruitarian, basically. And he ate iceberg lettuce because he just really liked it, but he would eat like 10 cups of it would be his salad. And so you do the math on a quarter cup, it's like, it's mostly water. Mm-hmm. But when you multiply that by 40, suddenly he's getting almost an entire day's worth of iron, from iceberg lettuce. And sure, I'm not saying, don't go home and say, that crazy dietitian told me to eat 40 servings of iceberg lettuce. But it's an example that the numbers can add up pretty quickly, which comes back to my original point, that these things are very nutrient dense without a lot of calories. My concern for him was, you can eat 10 cups of iceberg lettuce, so it's only going to be like 100 calories or something, But we can do that, So something like kale that is very good for you, a serving is a half a cup cooked. A half a cup, that's just a few forkfuls. It's not hard to eat a cup or 2 cups of cooked kale. And then, you're getting 4 times the nutrients. And so when you look at a label or you look it up online to see how much iron is in it, and that's for 1 serving. And when you multiply that out, you find that it's quite easy to get all of your nutrients that way. I do a project called Day in the Life of Vegan Athletes. It's a video project. We do like webisodes that are under 10 minutes where we kind of spend the day with a vegan athlete. And it goes with my philosophy that everyone is different, and, there's the guy who eats 10 cups of iceberg lettuce, and then there's, the guy who just eats burritos that he buys at Mexican places every day, and those are very different ways to approach, the same umbrella of vegan athletes. And I think we're up to 11 or 12 episodes now, and all of those are on my website there, which is True Love Health. It's a neat little fun project just to look at the variety that exists and that there are indeed athletes that are out doing it. And it's along with my philosophy of not preaching like, if you can run 135 miles through Death Valley, if you were vegan, I don't think that's the case. Well, maybe. But showing that they are out there and they are doing it. And then lastly, sort of this is my, some resources. These are my favorite books and websites and sort of my cheat sheets that I go to. So I want you to have them as well, so that when you come across someone, a client in the future, you have these to look at. Because there's a lot of stuff out there about vegetarian nutrition that is skeptical, or you should be skeptical about. And so this is kind of my favorite places to go for that information.
I had my degree in Ayurveda from India, and I had my degree in 1990, so that's like 25 years now, almost 23 years. It's hard to believe since I'm 29, but and I've been practicing Ayurveda ever since, even before I came here, and I just found it hard when I came here that it doesn't have much recognition in this country and about the Ayurveda. Many people don't know what Ayurveda is. And I decided that I want to have something that I can practice Ayurveda with the license, because the type of practice or the type of medicine that I was allowed to practice here in this country was just not acceptable. It was, you're not allowed to take the pulse, which is a huge deal in Ayurveda. Like, you take the pulse for the constitution and not prescribe anything. It's basically just, like pickles and jams and of the herbs and do that. So then I thought maybe I need something which is, which can complement Ayurveda. And so then I became licensed acupuncturist. So now I combine acupuncture and Ayurveda. I do acupuncture, and then I give the diet and lifestyle. I put them on the diet, Ayurveda diet and lifestyle. And it's been working great in my practice. Mostly then I just have to tell my patients that they don't have to become vegetarian. But at least, like part of, when the treatment is going on, or if I put them on the diet, it's like the detox diet that we call it, it's completely vegetarian. And then I find some people not making full commitment to that fact, since, we don't know. So out of those people, however, who still, who manage to go on vegetarian diet, and they have told me personal experiences, like pretty close to what Matt was saying, that it wasn't as bad or as hard as they thought. However, you do need to make the commitment. If you want to be, I'm not a vegan, I'm vegetarian. But if you want to be vegetarian or vegan, it's not impossible. I mean, come on, Mahatma Gandhi his life was vegan, and it was his choice. And it has his, as I will also say a few things, but it's a commitment. You have to, you can't just take it lightly. If you want to get the nutrients, just, make that commitment. But it's totally possible, and it's very, very simple. Like very few simple things that you just have to make sure. So the first thing about the Ayurveda was that it's the health model, and it's not the disease model. And that's something that I really, really liked. Is meaning that it's Ayurveda, and I'm going to tell the meaning in a minute, but it's not any kind of pathy. You know what I mean? It's not like allopathy or even like naturopathy. So when you have that pathy, then it's like it's some pathology, and you're treating that pathology. So like naturopathy, you're treating it with natural medicine, not natural cure, but it's still you're doing something to treat the diseases, right? Or allopathy, any of that, homeopathy. The definition of Ayurveda is Ayu, which is life, and Veda, that means science or knowledge, right? So it's the life science. It's the knowledge about life, and it's a health science. And that's one thing I like about this Ayurveda model, that it's the health model. It's not the disease model, meaning that treating the diseases is the secondary role for Ayurveda. The primary role of Ayurveda is prevention. Since this is a spiritual medicine, so this comes from Veda, which is a very, very spiritual part of, like it's a spiritual culture, right, in India. And they wanted that if the people are to be becoming spiritual and practicing spiritualism, or like meditating and doing yoga and being those yogis, then they need to be healthy. They need to be healthy, and so that's why there was a need to discover the health model to treat them, right? I mean, you just can't have like those yogis meditating in Himalayas being constipated, right? So, or like be really, really bloated. So, you have to be healthy in order to practice, your life, or to go on with your daily life. Ayurveda is not about eating, so it's about you be vegetarian, but there are so many choices, like Matt was saying. there are so many choices. Main thing I hear from my patients is, being vegetarian is just eating salad, or just it's like so boring, and it's like eating raw salad. It's just the ignorance that they don't, that's something that needs to be addressed. Is no, there are so many varieties. My husband is vegetarian too, and it was very, very hard for us when we came here, 18 years ago. Especially, like some of the places that he had to go, Midwest and everywhere, and he would be like sometimes really starving, if he didn't get any food, any vegetarian food. And so his colleagues were like, well, what do you eat? What do you do? You just eat like what, spinach and like salad? Like, what do you get? Like how and it's like boring and like whatever. And he's like, no, like all these years it's my conscious choice. I don't find that there is, I don't find a need to become non-vegetarian, because I get enough and I have enough variety. This is the oldest medicine with a spiritual origin, which has the same common origin as yoga. That's also like something that people have seemed to be accepted. Yoga is becoming pretty, like it has already become popular since 75. Somehow Ayurveda, which is its sister branch, which Ayurveda and yoga were actually bound together for the same, like the yogis wanted, like some diet system, and that's what we created Ayurveda. And it has common, and you cannot just choose one and not do the other, right? It comes as a package. As, like Chinese medicine is not complete without, like Tai Chi or Qigong, right? So that's how it is, like, Ayurveda and yoga, they would have the same origin. So we come up with the elemental configuration, like which is you see out in the world, in the universe, and we call it like the macrocosm and microcosm, right? So it's like we are the small part of the universe. So if the universe is made of 5 elements, so are we, right? So then that's why we do not believe in extracts in Ayurveda. Right? Because we take a whole plant, and that's the herb that we take. Or, in Ayurveda, the food is the medicine, right? It's not just like, like one herb, or it's a pill. It's the food that we use as a medicine. So it's like the food as a whole, because we want to eat that food to treat and that's the reason why sometimes people get deficiency, right? Because if you're made up of 5 elements, if the universe is made up of 5 elements, all the food is made up of 5 elements. So in order for us to, get nourished, we need to take that food as a whole food. If you're just taking extract out, then that means you're just taking that fire element out. That's what the modern medicine or the nuclear medicine would do. They would do extract. Like they'll take the digitalis plant, take the digitalis extract, and now all we have is the side effects. Of course, because you are made up of 5 elements, and you're only adding your fire element to your body, right? So that's where the side effects come in, and that's where the imbalances start to come in. So this is the motto here, Ayurveda proverb. One of my favorite is the food as a medicine. Without proper diet, medicines are of no use, and with proper diet, medicines are of no need. So just a brief introduction of the constitution, the Vata person. This is the constitution like Vata constitution, the person who is always on the go, right? The dancers, or or they are the stress, like the anxiety and stress. Those are their predominant emotions. But this is the imbalanced side. So when they are balanced, they are very creative, very active people, and they are like always on the go, but then they need some calming and settling diet and lifestyle. Then here's our Pitta constitution, which the fire and water elements. And I always, when I was in college here, I would talk to Warren and Bob and everybody that, I can totally now make the connection, right? So this is your like liver personality, right? Liver chi stagnation. The fire and water elements coming together, and with the attributes of heat and transformation, this person is always hot, trained to get the inflammatory diseases all the time. But a positive aspect of that is this person is going to have strong will and strong determination, and his diet and lifestyle should be like cooling. right? The spices are not probably for like not like there are so many spices like specifically for this, but they cannot be like eating all the spices, right? They would get their pitta disorders even more. Like worse. And this is lastly your kapha constitution. And we are not just one kapha or vata or pitta. We're a combination of like all of those. So these are the earth, water elements together with the attributes of cohesion and inertia. Like when with the inertia comes that heaviness, strength, and endurance, right? These are our, like spleen, water, or spleen and kidney kind of constitution people, right? They tend to get the flame, or, like the heaviness, obese or diabetes, like all these, if they don't keep in balance. But they do have their positive attributes are they have strength and endurance, heaviness. So in order for them to stay healthy, they need to keep it light, right? So they need spices would be like fabulous for these people, right? They are the people who can have all the spices in the whole world. And as long as they keep it light and so all we do is like we take the different grains, it's still vegetarian grains and legumes, and then we choose, okay, this is the grain good for kapha people. This grain is particularly for pitta people and vata people. And these are there are several of the grains which are neutral, which can be we call them tridoshic. Anybody can get them. Here I have these three attributes of the mental constitution: the sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. I'm going to tell you in a minute. Sattvic means like the mild personality. Right? And the sattvic diet would be the fresh vegetarian diet for sure. And so because the sattvic diet would be something that comes under it's nourishing and invigorating. Then the rajasic diet is like all the heat diet, right? So that's like one example of it would be non-vegetarian diet. Red meat, which is very, very inflammatory, right? Rajasic principle is like the hot principle. So that red meat or eating non-vegetarian diet would add some restlessness and irritability and anger in your body. And then lastly, the tamasic food, which is has worse kapha attributes, would be like the processed food, like made very heavily deep fried, heavy processed foods, cold frozen foods. And they are all the tamasic food, which adds lethargy and ignorance. Because we are whole foods to culture the wholeness. We are not fragmented. We are whole, right? I'm not going to say, I'm really busy. I'm just going to send my skin there, right? Or I'm going to send my one body part here. No, you are whole. You're not fragmented. So why do we need to eat fragmented food? If you don't take the whole food, then you're going to have imbalance in your body, the elemental imbalances. So the holistic support for the holistic results, you need to have all these options: grains, fruits, vegetables, seeds, beans, herbs, and roots, yam or potato, used in proper combination. So the vegetarian diet for the spiritual discipline to add physical health, mental clarity, and spiritual progress, which makes food is truly the divine reality. So the most diseases, if you see modern diseases, cancer, diabetes, heart diseases, they are actually traceable to the incorrect diet.
I teach here at Pacific College. I co-authored a book, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Kitchen, thanks. Recipes from the East for Health, Healing, and Long Life. Which came out in 2010, actually won the San Diego Book Award in 2011, I think, for Best Cookbook, so we got some press. But that's me. I have a background before Chinese medicine I studied with Japanese teachers, macrobiotics, for a number of years. I'm not a vegan. And Chinese medicine, as a number of students out here will attest, doesn't preach doesn't really endorse the vegan diet or the vegetarian diet at all. It recommends small amounts of meat. But Chinese medicine also doesn't endorse the standard American diet or the paleo diet or the you name it diet, right? What it does really recommend is a diet which is largely plant-based and which is individuated for a specific patient's constitution and their specific health needs and their specific lifestyle. And it really does recommend a broad variety of plant-based foods. Really, 90% or more of the diet that's recommended by Chinese medicine is plant-based. And it's actually a misconception that many Chinese medical students and practitioners have, because they're always recommending meat, meat, meat. And really with Chinese medicine, and Sarita will tell you this, it's really, when they do use meat, the meat is like, for them, medicine in a way, small amounts. We do recommend, plant-based foods, whole foods. We support that with herbal medicine. Most people have a conception of Chinese medicine as acupuncture or acumoxa theory, maybe a massage or tuina, tai chi, qigong. But food therapy is a major wing of Chinese medicine.
Yangshan.
And exactly, in terms of like nourishing life, sustaining life for health and longevity. And for thousands of years, this has been a part of really the concepts of Chinese medicine. It doesn't endorse veganism because in Chinese medicine, we feel that in order to build blood, there needs to be a small amount of animal products. Some of this is just clinical evidence from the Chinese, and then some of it is probably culturally based because the Chinese have a certain relationship with certain animals, especially pig, which they eat a lot of. But also Chinese medicine really talks a lot about foods to avoid, much like, there's really some similarities to what Sarita just showed us with Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine in terms of really taking the individual patient and bringing them to a place of balance and health. But in order to do that, we recommend, basically foods to avoid, which is largely your entire supermarket, as most of us know. At least the whole center part of the supermarket, like, the fresh vegetables on the side are okay, and the water on the other side is probably okay. And other than that, it's, avoid your supermarket. Yeah, so avoid greasy foods, depending upon your constitution, foods that may be too spicy, foods that are too sweet, especially refined foods. And I'm sure Sarita would agree. Well, you already said, basically eat whole foods. And from my experience, that's the path to health. Not even being on a diet, just eating a large variety of whole plant-based foods. We have this idea of, in Chinese medicine, that the path to building what we call blood, which supports the health, is through the spleen of the stomach, which represents, in our medicine, the digestive system. So no matter what you eat, really, if you don't have a healthy digestive system, according to Chinese medicine, you're not going to build blood. So building this strong digestion is key to the formation of blood in our medicine and the formation of health. So it's almost, that is really the main goal. Because you could eat the perfect diet, but if your digestion, basically, for lack of a better word, sucks, then your health is going to suck. Because you're not building, you're not actually extracting the nutrients to build blood.
Iron deficiency is the most common deficiency in the world. Everyone should be thinking about that, no matter what you eat, especially women. And I think new vegetarians and new vegans need to be conscious of their iron and where they're getting it from. It's in a lot of things, like I said, but you have to make sure you're actually eating those and that you are getting the whole foods. Getting grains, beans are all high in iron. And then iron, you can actually influence the absorption quite a bit by eating it with vitamin C foods, for example, at the same time. So if you're going to rice and beans, then you have some salsa. So the vitamin C that's in the tomatoes helps increases the absorption of the iron that's in the beans and the rice. So that's a big one. And then B12, of course, is an ongoing issue and comes up all the time with vegans because B12 is only found in animal products, but it's actually made by bacteria. And so you have to make sure that you do have a non-animal source of that if you are eating an exclusively vegan diet. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know it. There's definitely an upper limit, and it can be toxic for sure. But I mean, if you're eating food normally, you don't have to worry about toxicity. It's much harder to do through food, if not impossible. There's definitely differences, with like vitamin E and B12, for example. Those are umbrella terms, right? And they're actually different forms, and they're all absorbed at different rates and whatnot. But I think there's kind of an obsession over these differences that is unnecessary. B12 is an example, between, methylcobalamin and the other ones. It's in micrograms, right? So the amount is so small that your multi or your supplement, you're getting like 6,000% of your daily value. And so if they're absorbed differently, it doesn't make a difference, really, if that makes sense. And I like to say that, we kind of look at like standard American food and like giant corporations and selling us refined foods, and like that's absolutely true. But then we also have the supplement and like the nutrition industry, which is also a billion-dollar industry, which bills itself as like the little guy, and hey, we're just out here selling vitamins, we want people to be healthy, and I think they're just as bad. I know there is a vegan glucosamine that exists because a few of my friends take it. I'm not convinced by the research that it's actually helpful, but if you take it and it seems helpful, then that's research enough, for you as an individual, definitely. And, there is some evidence on the nightshade vegetables and arthritis. There actually is some good evidence about that, so it's something to think about.
Yeah, I might add that there's no evidence of any relationship between running and arthritis. A recent article in the New York Times actually went through that, and it just,
I read that. It was very good. It's very interesting, yeah.
Well, I mean, food's a bill of blood. I mean, basically, in Chinese medicine, uses what we call the doctrine of signature, where like treats like. So we red foods, beets, tomatoes, cherries. What else is red? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what's that? Oh yeah, goji berries, great. But also leafy green vegetables. I think anything with like chlorophyll, the hemoglobin molecule and the chlorophyll molecule are very similar, and so anything with chlorophyll in it, leafy green vegetables especially, and just in terms of vegetarian sources. Yeah. Black seeds, like things that are black sesame seeds, black beans. Also, blackberries,
We do prune and plum juice. Plums and prune are also good sorts of.
Yeah, some sources say like Guinness Stout.
Yeah, it's not vegetarian. Yeah.
It takes me about that's the maximum time of the consultation, where we like 3 positions of the pulse, the same thing that we do with the TCM pulse, but we just have like Vata, Pitta, and Kapha for 3 constitution. And it's actually taken at 6 different levels. So that kind of gets
6 levels on each one?
6 levels on each one. Usually for females, we take left hand, and for males, we take right hands. But you can do both. And so like the first level would be the superficial level. That is what is going on, the constitution, if there are any balances, physiological imbalances or pathological imbalances. That's a superficial. And then the last, some people do 5 levels, some people do 6 levels. I do actually 5 levels. But the bottom one, like close to the bone, is the constitution that you are born with. So it's very revealing when I take the deep pulse, like very, very deep pulse. That's how the constitution that you were born with. And then very barely superficial pulse. And then you see now the imbalance. Like from the constitution that you were born with and what is going on right now. And plus, you have to take some physiological imbalances in mind, plus also the age of the person, because as we age, like we go from kapha and then pitta in the youth, and old age is vata. So, like taking that all into consideration, it gives pretty good idea. And then we take like the bottom part, the right after that, then we have like 5 different subtypes of each doshas, depending on which body that each dosha rules. Then the third level is the tissue level, and then the fourth level is the organ levels.
On the tissue, the organ, you can tell what's going on
In that particular tissue, or whether so the superficial imbalances, how deep are they going? So we can actually take the pulse in taking all 5 levels. We can actually tell even if the person is asymptomatic, that where are the imbalances and in which tissue they are starting to sink in. And then the deeper, like after the tissue, so the tissue would be something like we have, this is Ayurvedic, but the plasma level, blood level, muscle level, fat, adipose tissue level, then bone level, and then bone marrow level, and then lastly the reproductive organs. Not the organs, but the reproductive tissues. Then the bottom level is the organ pulse, which I find pretty, not similar, but that's something that you can relate to the Chinese pulse that we do, like lung and large intestine, like those organs, like or liver and gallbladder. And we have some differences. We do have liver, gallbladder, and spleen, but we have like brain and all the organs. And then the bottom level is like, like there's somebody does like the spiritual level, like the mental something. It's like, find at the 5th level. I don't do that. That's very, very complicated. And you have to be really precise and very, very sure.
Frozen stuff has come a long way, I think, because they're freezing it immediately after they pick it. And so in some frozen stuff could actually have more nutrients in it than something that's been in your fridge for like a week. That's actually degrading, and the frozen could be a better choice. If it's been in your freezer for a year, you're going to start losing some, of course. But frozen stuff actually is pretty good. And then cooked, not as much as people think. The whole thing, you shouldn't boil your vegetables in water and then throw out the water. Like then you're definitely losing the water-soluble vitamins. But if you're sautéing in oil and you're eating everything that's in the pan, you're getting those nutrients. And carrots, for example, you actually, cooking it makes some of the vitamins more available than eating them raw. Yeah, which I think is bunk mostly, honestly. I think there's a lot of benefits to eating that much fruit and vegetable, I think. But the whole enzyme thing, I'm not convinced about. There's almost no research on it. People who eat more fruits and vegetables have lower rates of cancer, right? We know that. Like, we have that from lots of studies. But why? What is in it and how does it work and what are those functions? That's unanswered. But I think that's...
But they're starting to identify some of these phytochemicals.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah,
Lycopene in tomatoes was one.
Yeah,
Sure.
indoles or sulforaphane and folates, so they're all...
Yeah, they're there and they're being identified, and the research is happening. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
Isoflavones, the flavonols in cacao and chocolate and stuff.
Yeah.
It's been debunked, right? It's like kind of science-y sounding book, right? But no professionals or anyone with a background in that has endorsed it. I don't think there's truth to it. I don't see how there could be, honestly.